Superstars teaming up is common nowadays in the NBA. LeBron James, Kyrie Irving, and Kevin Love with the Cleveland Cavaliers in 2014. Kevin Durant with Stephen Curry and the Golden State Warriors in 2016. Kawhi Leonard and Paul George to the LA Clippers in 2019. LeBron James, Anthony Davis, and Russell Westbrook with the LA Lakers in 2021. Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, and James Harden in Brooklyn in 2021. Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, and Bradley Beal in Phoenix in 2023. Luka Doncic, Kyrie Irving, and Klay Thompson in 2024. But it all started in the summer of 2010 when LeBron James uttered these words announcing his intention to play for the Miami Heat in the infamous ESPN TV special on July 8, 2010.
The answer to the question everybody wants to know. LeBron, what's your decision?
In this fall, man, this is very tough. In this fall, I'm going to take my talents to South Beach and join the Miami Heat.
It reverberated throughout the league and caused a seismic shift in the power dynamics between the players and team owners. LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, Chris Bosh. There were notable big three in years past, but nothing compared to what the three of them had done in terms of the audacity. Nothing. Not Bill Russell's Celtics of the 60s. Not the Celtics and Lakers of the 80s. Not even the dynastic Bulls of the 90s. The 80s Boston Celtics formed their big three by picking Larry Bird 6th overall in the 1978 NBA draft and trading for Robert Parrish and Kevin McHale in the 1980 NBA draft. The Showtime Lakers traded for Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and then drafted Magic Johnson and James Worthy. The Chicago Bulls drafted Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen and later traded for Dennis Rodman. The 2000s Los Angeles Lakers signed Shaquille O'Neal as a free agent and drafted Kobe Bryant. The 2008 Celtics drafted Paul Pierce and traded for Ray Allen and Kevin Garnett in later years. The Golden State Warriors drafted Stephen Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, and then added Kevin Durant through free agency. But in Miami's case, they managed to sign three franchise superstars in one swoop, including the presumptive best player in the league at that time, James. Just imagine Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, and Larry Bird all in their primes, playing for the Bulls, Lakers, or Celtics together. That's what James, Wade, and Bosh did in the summer of 2010. The negative reactions from former players and fans were swift, especially after the welcoming party that the Heat prepared for the trio.
I have not bumped into LeBron, but, my criticism was of that decision thing, which was silly. I thought he should have told the Cavaliers in advance. And when they came around, jumping around on stage like idiots, I don't care if he went to Miami. I wish him the best. I think he's the best basketball player in the world. But he's made a ton of mistakes this summer.
Is the NBA better off for this big player shuffle we just saw this past week?
That's yet to be determined. I think, free agency is a part of every professional sport. And, how that's going to, play into this whole scenario, I don't really know. I think time will tell. There's no way that, just hindsight, I would have never, called up Larry, called up Magic and say, hey, let's get together and play on one team. I mean, things are different. I can't say that's a bad thing. I mean, that's the opportunity these kids have today. I mean, in all honesty, I was trying to beat those guys.
Through the mud for 7 years and established in the heart, he deserves everything he gets. I hope he never wins anything in Miami.
The guy gave up in Game 3, and this is what he has to reward us with. Like, this is terrible. He wants to go to a city. He calls himself a sports historian, a guy who embraces the NBA and knows knowledge about the NBA. And he goes to Miami, where the most fickle fans are? This is terrible. This is the worst thing that could ever happen to Cleveland since Modell taking the Browns away.
I'm actually shocked. I thought he would stay here in Cleveland. He knows what, championships mean to us. We haven't had one. And to make an announcement, a big announcement like this on national TV, it just seems like it's a slap in Cleveland's face.
James was criticized left and right for sticking it to Cleveland in national television. Cavaliers fans burned his jersey and uttered profanities toward him. Cavs owner Dan Gilbert issued a scathing letter denouncing James and the move that he made. James and the Heat were booed and ridiculed in every arena they've been on. The magnitude of the signing was felt all over the NBA. It was the dawn of the Superteam Era, and LeBron James spearheaded the movement. It all started at the 2008 Beijing Olympics, where James was surrounded by incredible talents and the appeal of teaming up with other stars in free agency started creeping in his mind. The beginning of his departure from the Cleveland Cavaliers came in small moments on the daily bus rides with his redeemed team teammates and on the basketball court. Being together for an extended period of time, Dwayne Wade, Chris Bosh, and James kept talking about the summer of 2010, about the chance of a lifetime to chase championships together, and rolled like the Beatles in every NBA city. During that time, Gilbert and then general manager Danny Ferry consistently wondered every day what it would take to get James to re-sign with them in 2010. What will make him stay? They serenaded him and tugged his heartstrings by having fans lined up on the streets holding signs that said "Home" when James arrives on the arena during the period leading up to free agency. Every decision that the Cavaliers made had to be run past James and his team first. When Gilbert believed he had to fire Cavs coach Mike Brown to have a chance of re-signing James, he did it despite Brown guiding Cleveland to 66 victories and winning Coach of the Year. James had wanted Brown fired for years, but Ferry managed to keep Brown all those times until 2010 came. Eventually, Gilbert pushed Ferry out and replaced him with Chris Grant, clearing the way for the Brown firing. But the answer to their question, as the Cavaliers later found out, was nothing. James and those with knowledge of his plans knew that he never intended to re-sign with the Cavaliers. Proceeding immediately after the Cavs were eliminated by the Boston Celtics in the 2010 playoffs, James was caught by the cameras taking off his Cavs uniform and looking exasperated, as if giving a clear signal that he is done with the team. After that, James had started to fully distance himself from the organization. First by refusing to get on the phone and discuss his future with Michigan State's Tom Izzo, whom Gilbert had offered $30 million to take over as coach from Brown, and by not returning any of Gilbert's calls and messages. Two of James' close friends delivered a direct message to Izzo that should he decided to take the Cavaliers' job, he should take it with an expectation he'll never coach James in Cleveland. A clear indication that James coming back to the team was never a guarantee. Because of that, Izzo had turned down the Cavs job that eventually went to Byron Scott. The franchise was in complete upheaval, and Gilbert had the Cavaliers trying everything possible to impress a non-responsive James. That disconnect between James and the Cavaliers were not lost on Miami Heat president Pat Riley. He was monitoring the situation from afar, and he had informants and spies everywhere, including Wade, who had been telling Riley for most of 2 years they could lure James to South Beach. The Heat had everything they needed to sell James, except for what finally arrived on the eve of the NBA draft: salary cap space. Riley, a 5-time NBA champion and a Hall of Famer, continued to dump contract after contract annually in a high-wire act that left him without a safety net leading up to free agency 2010. And on the night of the 2010 draft, Riley hung up on a call with Oklahoma City Thunder GM Sam Presti to complete the salary dump of Daquan Cook. The last piece of the puzzle. After all the months, all the careful planning, Riley had cleared the necessary cap space to give the 3 stars contracts starting at about $15 million. And it wouldn't take long until word spread around the NBA that the Miami Heat had the cap space to make it happen. The greatest free agent coup in history was within reach. Free agency wouldn't officially start for another week on July 1st, but from then on, sources close to the situation had only 2 words about LeBron and the Heat: it's a done deal. Those closest to James had understood something about James that the Cavaliers refused to believe and accept. LeBron James was never re-signing with them. And it was just a matter of securing him the proper complement of teammates for the greatest free agent haul in history. Riley always believed that he could unload the contracts needed to make room for the 3. And mostly, he believed in his own power of persuasion. He is still the biggest presence, biggest voice in the room. Riley believed in his ability to get into the room with stars and sell them on the way the 1980s Los Angeles Lakers sacrificed salary, shots, and statistics for the greater good of a dynasty. Most of all, Riley believed he could benefit on the close relationship that Wade has with James and Bosh, and that there wasn't a franchise with cap space that could offer such a compelling case to the two of them. Riley ran the Heat for years in a bold way, and he had two things to sell the best players in the NBA: South Beach and his larger-than-life persona. Riley also had come to believe James would likely leave Cleveland, but became largely certain once the Cavaliers lost to the Boston Celtics in the Eastern Conference semifinals. For the first time, James could no longer blame his supporting cast and coaching for a playoff exit. His peculiar performance in the Game 5 blowout, lethargic and distant, pushed James on trial. Him not being able to win a championship despite being in the league for 7 years put him on the clock and on the spotlight. James suitors started to line up at the offices of Clutch Sports in downtown Cleveland on July 1, 2010. The Cavs, Heat, New Jersey Nets, New York Knicks, Chicago Bulls, and LA Clippers were all prepared and ready to make their case to James and his team. The Nets, with owner Mikhail Prokhorov and minority partner Jay-Z, were the first to make a formal presentation. The Nets made a pointed, flashy presentation on the franchise's eventual move to a new arena in Brooklyn and delivered a creative, if not embellished, explanation of how Prokhorov held an international blueprint for James on how to catapult him someday into the billionaire athlete that he always wanted to be. In pitching the Nets, who had won only 12 games the previous year, Jay-Z promised James that the Nets were going to be a force. With a partnership together, they could own New York and someday the sporting world. The New York Knicks followed the Nets by repeating those themes with an array of PowerPoints and charts about accumulating wealth, playing in Madison Square Garden, and exploding his brand by playing in New York. But James drifted away almost immediately from the meeting. Later, James would tell Jay-Z that parts of New York's presentation felt too redundant to New Jersey's. The third team to pitch James was the Bulls. They met him on July 2nd, and unlike the other suitors, the Bulls did not cart any visual aids or equipment. They stayed for 3 hours, one day after they sat down with Dwayne Wade for the second time since free agency opened. Chicago's group left in 2 black SUVs to a chorus of boos from the Cleveland fans who hung around while they were upstairs. Chicago was hoping that the chance to follow Michael Jordan's larger-than-life legacy, a talented roster featuring rising star guard Derrick Rose and forward Joakim Noah, and nearly $30 million of space under the salary cap will be enough to lure James to the Windy City. But for everything the Bulls tried to sell, from owner Jerry Reinsdorf to GM Gar Forman to coach Tom Thibodeau, there had been one thing that troubled James about the Bulls' pitch. Derrick Rose never called and tried to recruit him. Chicago officials never directly requested Rose to reach out with a call, and the young point guard felt James could have always reached out to him had he wanted to discuss the possibility of playing together. James needed to be courted, needed to be wooed, and apparently it surprised him there was a star who wasn't falling over himself to do that. Riley's presentation on July 3rd pushed James closer to committing to Miami more than ever. He never pitched James's return to coaching, but bringing those 5 championship rings into the meeting was the exclamation point that Riley needed to finally close James. No other basketball executive in the process could tell James they understood what a title team needed, what it looked like, and how they had already done it like Riley could. Riley had such credibility, such presence, and he completely captivated James. Want the best talent? It's here. Want a Hall of Fame coach? He's upstairs, waiting for your arrival. Riley never sold any coach to James in the meeting, but it wasn't too big of a deal for James. Wade had already sold him on Eric Spoelstra, and Wade didn't want Riley hovering over his coach the way he had Stan Van Gundy before taking over on the title run in 2006. Wade wasn't allowed to recruit for the Heat before the end of the NBA Finals because he was still a Heat employee. Yet before the end of the finals, there were 2 June meetings that involved Wade and members of James' inner circle, one in Ohio and another in Chicago. The pressure on James to start winning titles was rising every year, and Riley understood this was playing in his favor. The criticism of failing to win a title despite being considered the best player in the league year after year weighed heavily on James. All that would fade away with the Heat, Riley said, and it wouldn't be a matter of winning a single title, but rather how many they would line up. James, Wade, and Bosh talked on the telephone late on July 6th after Wade had gone back to Miami and met with Riley and Heat owner Mickey Arison to tell them that he was ready to formally commit to staying. He already had Bosh in his pocket, and they just needed James to make the move with them. They hung up the phone late that night and thought James was prepared to make the jump with them. Wade and Bosh made public their choices on July 7th and waited for word that would soon quietly come to them. LeBron James was on his way to Miami, and the greatest coup in free agent history was complete. In a recent episode of the OG's podcast, hosted by his former teammates Mike Miller and Udonis Haslem, Wade revealed that it was actually James' idea for the three of them to team up and play together.
Actually leaving Miami at that time.
Really?
I didn't think that nobody out there that we could get was going to help us get to that level. Not that they weren't good players. I just didn't think it was enough. So we had conversations.
There's levels of
like this is free agency.
No doubt.
We are free to go and experience like what we want. And at that time, I wanted to be a part of a team that could win. And for me, my hometown team can win. So I was like, man, I'm going back home. I'm going to Chicago. I played 7 years here. I won a championship. It's time to go to the next. And for me, that was my mentality going to free agency outside of Miami. Now, of course, Miami was still in there for me. But I got that call, man. I got that call from number 6.
James needed Wade's and Bosh's help to get him over the hump and finally win that elusive first championship. Because for all his individual accomplishments, not winning a championship will never put his name alongside the names of the greats who have won it. He went to Miami to save his legacy and, thus, gave birth to the super team culture of today's NBA.